I'm Tawfik in Washington, and this is BBC World News America. Lawyers for Novak Djokovic try to stop his deportation from Australia after his visa is canceled again. The U.S. accuses Russia of sending saboteurs into Ukraine to justify an invasion. We'll have the latest. And the intermission is over. Cirque du Soleil are back in the UK after a COVID-imposed hiatus. Welcome to World News America on PBS and around the globe. It's a story with as many twists and turns as a rally on the tennis court. The Australian government has agreed to delay the deportation of Novak Djokovic after his visa was cancelled for a second time in a dispute over COVID rules. The world number one, who hasn't been vaccinated, is likely to be detained on Saturday. Australia's immigration minister says the latest visa cancellation was made on the grounds of health and good order. Shaima Khalil has the latest from Melbourne.
This is 9 News, live from Sydney. 7 News.
Just moments ago, the immigration minister has cancelled Novak Djokovic's visa.
It's a story that made headlines here in Australia and around the world. For days, Novak Djokovic has been on the court training, and now the government has finally announced its decision. The tennis star's visa has been cancelled again, and for the second time, he faces deportation from Australia. In his statement, the country's immigration minister, Alex Hawke, said, "Today I exercise my power to cancel the visa held by Mr. Novak Djokovic on health and good order grounds, on the basis that it was in the public interest to do so." The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, said the sacrifices Australians made throughout the pandemic should be protected. Mr. Morrison's government has faced heavy criticism for allowing the unvaccinated player into Australia in the first place, while the country struggled with a spike in COVID-19 case numbers.
I think it was a pretty mess up that they did, but now I think they corrected the way. It's unfortunate that Novak won't be playing the tournament. It's a pretty big loss.
Yeah, I think if everyone else has to follow the rules, why can't he? And obviously he thought he was above it all.
The Australian Open is only a couple of days away, and there are now huge doubts over whether Novak Djokovic will be able to compete. But even if he did secure his freedom, a chaotic and stalled preparation will only get worse. Andy Murray says the controversy has been bad for the sport.
It just seems like it's dragged on for quite a long time now, and yeah, not great for the tennis, not great for the Australian Open, not great for Novak.
His former coach, the multiple Grand Slam winner Boris Becker, said this story has become about more than just sport.
He's only a tennis player. We're all just sportsmen. We're not politicians. If we're used in a political way, then we don't have a chance.
The world number one is still fighting to defend his title here. Whether or not he'll be able to play, the Australian Open will take place under the shadow of a controversy that has gone way beyond tennis. Shaima Khalil, BBC News, Melbourne.
Well, the U.S. government has accused Russia of plotting to stage acts of sabotage against its own side as a pretext to invade Ukraine. The Pentagon says Moscow sent agents into eastern Ukraine with instructions to target Russian-backed forces there, what's known as a false flag operation. Now, the allegation denied by the Kremlin came just hours after Ukraine blamed Russia for a cyber attack on government websites. Here's what the U.S. Defense Department spokesman had to say on the escalating tensions.
We do have information that indicates that Russia is already working actively to create a pretext for a potential invasion. And again, we've seen this kind of thing before out of Russia. When there isn't an actual crisis to suit their needs, they'll make one up. And so we're watching for that.
Well, let's discuss this now with someone who is intimately familiar with the way Russia operates. That's Ambassador William Taylor, who is a former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. Thanks so much for being with us tonight. I mean, you know, this is an extraordinary statement from the administration. Are you surprised at all by their assessment?
I'm not, Netta. As the spokesman indicated, the Russians have done this before. This is part of their playbook. They are looking for an excuse to invade. They probably haven't decided exactly how they're going to do that, but they're putting in place all of the forces around the three borders of Ukraine. They're putting the possibility of this provocation, of this false flag operation that would give them the opportunity or the rationale or the justification for some kind of an invasion against its neighbor.
And before this, we had days of diplomacy, which Russia said had reached a dead end. So what is the real risk here of a conflict?
There is a real risk of conflict when you have all of these military forces massed around Ukraine, and you have President Putin, who has made it clear that he does not think Ukraine's a real country. He's published this. He put a long historical document in the public record last summer saying that Ukraine is not a real country. It's really just part of Russia. And with that kind of threat, together with these massed forces around, you have to take it seriously that the possibility of a war in Europe is real.
Well, given that, in the next coming days, weeks, what are some of the red lines between the U.S. and Russia that we have to look out for?
We'll, of course, be looking for an invasion, moving of the tanks and artillery across the border of Ukraine in towards populated areas, maybe as far as Kyiv, the capital. There are other scenarios. There are other ways that the Russians can attack Ukraine. They can attack Ukraine using long-range artillery or short-range missiles. They have already hacked into Ukrainian infrastructure. We saw this morning, hacking into ministries. They can do these kinds of things. They can cause problems by planting bad information. So there's information warfare that the Russians do well. So we're watching all of these actions. The United States government is making plans on how to respond to each one. There have been very clear responses outlined for the big invasion, the invasion that we hope doesn't come, but what we're prepared for and the Ukrainians are prepared for. And those include very harsh sanctions.
And Ambassador, briefly, given how big of a risk this would be for President Putin, what would you advise the U.S. government now on how to bring him back to the table?
I would advise not blinking. I would advise the U.S. government to maintain the firm position that Ukraine is a sovereign nation. It has all the rights of a sovereign nation. The United States government has been very clear all week in its diplomacy and in the three different areas, the three different pieces of the diplomacy that has been going on, first in Geneva, then in Brussels, then in Vienna. They've been very firm. The Deputy Secretary of State, Wendy Sherman, has been very clear that we will not close the door on Ukraine's membership in NATO.
All right, Ambassador Taylor, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now to another part of the former Soviet empire, Kazakhstan, where the authorities allege recent violence that claimed dozens of lives was an organized attack on the state. Now, they've blamed the unrest on armed extremists who they say were trained abroad. However, there's growing evidence that a power struggle within Kazakhstan's ruling elites may have fueled the violence. Our correspondent Steve Rosenberg reports from the country's biggest city, Almaty.
In a country the size of Western Europe, there is one question people are struggling to answer. Why? Why was Kazakhstan rocked by violence? The worst unrest here since the fall of communism. Outside the morgue in Almaty, they're queuing to collect bodies. Dozens of people are thought to have been killed in the clashes. Gusinar's brother Renat was missing for a week. She now knows he's dead. So many innocent people suffered because of someone, Kusina says. Those who made us cry should be punished. Why did they do it? In other words, why did peaceful protests over fuel prices suddenly turn violent? The authorities claim the protests were hijacked by terrorists, including foreign-trained militants, but they've presented little evidence of that.
The president of Kazakhstan says constitutional order has now been restored, the threat to his country's security averted. But the memory of what happened here, well, that won't be erased quickly, and questions remain about who was behind the violence.
Galim Agaliulov says he saw a suspicious group joining the protesters.
Some aggressive guys turned up with sticks and clubs. They were on every street corner, and they were directing everyone to the main square. It was building up to something.
There are indications that fueling the violence on the streets was a power struggle between President Tokayev, here on the right, and groups loyal to his predecessor, Nursultan Nazarbayev.
These gangs were mostly linked to the Nazarbayev clan, including people in the security service, which, it is said, committed state treason by sending these bandits out on the rampage.
There are victims on all sides here. In Kazakhstan, they're calling these the Black Days. Perhaps, until that question, why, is fully answered, these will remain uncertain times. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Almaty.
Let's take a look now at some other news. Lawyers for Virginia Giuffre, the woman who's accused Britain's Prince Andrew of sexually abusing her, have requested evidence from two witnesses based in the UK. One is the prince's former assistant, who was a senior member of his staff. The other is a woman who claims to have seen the prince at a nightclub in London with a young girl. Prince Andrew denies all the allegations against him. The British Prime Minister's office has apologized to Queen Elizabeth over two rule-breaking late-night parties that happened in Downing Street the night before her husband's funeral. At the time, Britain was in a period of national mourning and also under COVID restrictions that meant the Queen had to sit alone throughout the ceremony. Boris Johnson's spokesman said the parties were deeply regrettable. An Indian court has acquitted a Catholic bishop accused of repeatedly raping a nun in the southern state of Kerala. Franco Mulakal was accused of attacking the woman 13 times between 2014 and 2016. He denied the allegations. He temporarily stood down from his duties in 2018 following protests which led to his arrest. You're watching BBC World News America. Still to come on tonight's program. BBC Arabic reveals secret recordings believed to be of the former Tunisian President Ben Ali during his frantic last hours in power. That's still to come.
Come and see what you've never seen. Come on a journey you've never imagined. Welcome to Arabia, Saudi.
What we hope and pray that finally after 40 years the people of Afghanistan will have peace and stability.
My view of feminism is still really the same, which is that I think feminism is fundamentally a justice movement.
Africa will always remain important for me, and so I will continue doing what I do.
I could not have had a career as a gay man.
When big names talk, they talk to the BBC.
The first tennis Grand Slam of the year is here in Melbourne, but the Australian Open starts in the shadow of the Novak Djokovic visa controversy and the anger it has caused on both sides. For all the twists and turns on and off the court, join me, Shaima Khalil, here on BBC World News.
Returning to our top story now, the ongoing saga over Novak Djokovic and whether he will be allowed to play in the Australian Open given the country's COVID policies. I'm joined now from Melbourne by the BBC's Shaima Khalil. And Shaima, we have two hearings coming up over the weekend. What are we expecting to happen and when will we get a final decision?
Well, Naram, outside Novak Djokovic's lawyer's office, he is expected here soon for that hearing today that will happen in the next hour or so. Earlier, he was interviewed by immigration officers, and he will be accompanied by border force officers here. This is officially him being detained. He will be allowed here for 4 hours during that hearing. Remember, this is now a higher court, a federal court with a different judge. And yes, you're right, tomorrow we're also expecting another hearing, which his legal team have asked for. Essentially after this, he will be taken to an immigration detention hotel, possibly the one that he stayed in when he had arrived. But as it stands now, Novak Djokovic is in detention, allowed only time in his lawyer's office, and waiting for a judge to decide whether he stays here in Australia to defend his title at the Australian Open, whether he'd be deported like the government decided.
And Australians have a very strong feeling about whether or not he should play, don't they, Shaima? I mean, what have you been hearing from them?
Absolutely, and it's Australians in general, but I would say especially here in Melbourne where the Australian Open is taking place. This is the most locked down city in the world if you count the number of days. Many have told me that they've endured so much. They've been separated from their families, from their loved ones, unable to travel, unable to go out of their homes. Actually, they've done the right thing. They've been vaccinated. They're now urged to get their boosters. And remember, they're also seeing Omicron cases skyrocket in Australia, where at one point, one case was enough to send a whole city into lockdown. And here is a world-famous athlete who has been vocal in public about not wanting to get vaccinated, who has admitted to breaking COVID rules when he was positive, who has admitted to providing false information on his travel declaration form, being allowed in the country, challenging the government's decision. So the anger is not just at Novak Djokovic, it's also at the government for what many people see is a huge mishandling and miscommunication within the layers of power here.
All right, Shaima, thank you so much. We know you'll stay across that for us. We turn next to Tunisia, the birthplace of the Arab Spring. Today, demonstrators clashed with security forces on the 11th anniversary of the country's revolution. Protesters are critical of plans by the president to assume executive power and rewrite the constitution. Police used water cannons, and several people are reported to have been arrested. It was back in 2011 when Tunisia's longtime president Zine Ali Abidine Ben Ali was ousted, sparking similar uprisings across the region. Well, now the BBC has obtained recordings of the anxious phone calls Ben Ali made as he fled the country. Amir Nader reports.
For 2 decades, Zine Al Abidine Ben Ali ruled Tunisia, brutally suppressing opposition. But in 2011, anti-government protests swept the country, forcing the president to address the nation. The BBC has obtained secret recordings of phone calls we believe to have been made by the president to some of his closest advisors. They've been forensically analysed and played to people who know the individuals heard. They believe the voices to be genuine. The first call is understood to be with Tawfik bin Ammar, an influential media tycoon, just after Ben Ali's address to the nation. Tawfik bin Ammar says this call did not take place and he did not try to reassure Ben Ali about his rule. But Ben Ali's big speech did little to satisfy protesters overrunning the country. The president decides to escort his family to safety in Saudi Arabia. His plan is to return. Uncertain of where the president is, the prime minister makes an emergency decision.
أتولى بداية من الآن ممارسة سلطات رئيس الجمهورية.
Unaware of the announcement, Ben Ali calls who we believe is his defense minister, Rida Guerrera.
سيد الرئيس الله خرج بلاغ من الرئاسة ورئيس مجلس النواب ورئيس مجلس المستشارين قالوا مومونتانيمون محمد الغنوشي assure l'intérim.
يا ولدي محمد je reviens dans quelques heures. Je reviens dans quelques heures. C'est normal. الرئيس هو يسور. أنا je reviens dans quelques heures.
مرحبا بيك مرحبا بيك سيد الرئيس القتالة ترجع الدفاع معك العسكر معك.
As night falls, one man defies the strict curfew in place.
المجرم هرب بن عليه هرب بن عليه هرب من الشعب التونسي.
On the plane, Ben Ali calls who we believe is head of the army.
الوضع ممسوك شايفين اموركم ولا لا؟ لا لا باس الامور مسدوده لا باس. شوف يا رشيد يا رشيد يا نعم انصحني ندخل توا انصحني ندخل توا ولا بعد. لا هبني كان زيد شويه خير.
It's a new dawn for Tunisia. Ben Ali still hopes to return. In this last call to his defence minister, he learns that there is no way back.
سيد الرئيس أنا أقول لك بكل أمانة on ne peut pas assurer votre sécurité. هاو أقول لك قولها لك أنا اعتبرني ولدك اللي تحب أنت. الشارع قادم في الشارع بطريقة مش نقول لك.
شو اللي عملته أنا الشارع خدمته في
الشارع. أنا نعطيك الوضع مش على التفسير أنا نعطيك الوضع الأوبجيكتيف وأنت فسر واللي تروه. هذا.
Ben Ali never returned to Tunisia. His ministers formed a new government later that same day. The call shed light on how one of the world's most feared dictatorships collapsed in less than 24 hours. Amir Nader, BBC News.
Extraordinary to get that insight. Now, with its high-flying acrobats and circus contortionists, Cirque du Soleil leaves audiences around the world in awe. Pandemic lockdowns very nearly forced the group into bankruptcy, but they held on and are now back with a new show in London. The BBC's Bhavani Vadi has been taking a look at their return to the stage.
Their future was up in the air, but now a comeback and final rehearsals for the premiere of Lucia, a show promising a visual extravaganza set in an imaginary Mexico. A glimpse behind the scenes shows us what it takes to be part of this troupe, something Helena always dreamt of.
I started when I was 5 years old, really. I think all of that kind of adds up to now as well. And to maintain the show and run the show at least a few hours a day, but coming up to the premiere and getting everyone back together and retrained, we're working all day, 6 days a week.
The latest show takes water and light as inspiration, with trapeze artists twirling through pouring showers. Contortionist twisting himself into unimaginable positions, as well as plenty of other acrobatic stunts and surprises.
We up the ante every time we come back with more spectacular original acrobatics, more special events, a whole different concept, a whole different story, new costumes, and really they can expect to be moved off their seats.
This year, Cirque du Soleil celebrates 25 years of performing at the Royal Albert Hall, and it coincides with the venue's 150th anniversary celebrations.
It's really special to be here in the Royal Albert Hall. For many of us, it's a highlight of our career. I think it's something that a lot of us will look back on, and it's going to be that really special moment and one of the few that we will have and really remember as the biggest.
The company opened to a royal gala last time they were at the Royal Albert Hall, but then coronavirus hit, which led to shows around the world being cancelled, 95% of staff being laid off, and near bankruptcy for the company.
We actually did a run-through for the first time yesterday and we all wept a little bit. I don't think you expect how much it did hurt, how much it hurt. I'm actually getting emotional talking about it. You come back to work, it's another day on the job, but to see the show come back to life, all of us come back to life, after 2 years was quite an emotional moment for all of us.
The global circus brand is hoping its return to the capital is a bright light during a challenging time for theatres. Bhavani Vadi, BBC London.
And before we go, take a look at this out of India. In a twist on the tradition of bathing in the Ganges River, drones were used at an annual Hindu festival to sprinkle water on worshippers. Hoping to prevent crowds, the drones brought the water to the people. Nearly 1 million people gathered at the site despite a COVID surge. Well, thank you for watching World News America. I'm Tawfik. Have a great weekend.